one of the biggest things that people say to me when they first start having therapy with me is, I want to find out who I am. I don't know who I am, because I've been so bombarded throughout their parenting, the childhood experiences of being told, oh, don't be so sensitive, there's nothing wrong with you and stuff like that, that they completely disconnect from their own inner guidance, and they don't know who they are anymore by the time they're in the adult world. And people are alienated and deeply depressed and anxious. And this is the foundation for most of the maladies we see today, is deep disconnection from self.
Hello and welcome to the Mind Detox podcast. I'm your host, Sandy Newbigging. For today's episode, I'm sharing an interview from one of my recent online club meetings, which you can start your 30-day free trial of at minddetox.club. We talked to Dr. Melanie Salmon, who, believing there must be a better way, stopped being a medical doctor in 2007 to eventually create her own methodology called Q.E.C. I start by asking Dr. Melanie about the different kinds of early life traumas that can be limiting our health and life today. Listen in to see if any of these childhood traumas have happened to you, and to learn about how trauma not only impacts our body and emotions, but is also stored in our brain. That is, until we release it. Stay tuned as she gives a great overview of her Q.E.C technique for finding freedom through forgiveness. And if, after listening today, you want to experience Q.E.C for yourself, then head over to my website, minddetox.com, to book some one-on-one Q.E.C sessions with me. So, hello and welcome to this chit-chat with a very special guest, very special to me. I've been learning a huge amount from Dr. Melanie Salmon over the last year since our paths crossed. I originally heard about Dr. Melanie through a referral from a friend in Scotland who recommended Dr. Melanie's work for Christina, who you all know well, and who shared that she had some unconscious patterns coming up last year with panic attacks and anxiety. And when I saw just after one session what her method could do for someone so dear to my heart, I knew I had to learn the technique Q.E.C. And I've graduated as a practitioner of that, which I'm very happy about. And I've also been doing another course with Melanie about trauma, addictions, and crisis as well. So I'm trying to learn as much from Melanie as possible. And I wanted to invite Melanie to join us today because the theme this month is forgiveness. And one of the things I love about Q.E.C is how much of it is not only about forgiveness, but actually a genuine way to forgive, not just in the mind, but in the brain and the body too, which I'll be talking to Melanie about later today. So hello, Dr. Melanie.
Hello, thank you. This is an honor to be invited on. And not the person who's running the show. It's lovely. I'm really enjoying this. Thank you.
Yeah, it feels a bit weird the other way around this time. I've been listening to you for years. So thanks. I'm honored that you said yes. And I think it's a perfect topic to have you along. I was actually asked to do the theme of forgiveness, and I thought of you, and I was so happy when you said yes. So for those that haven't been hanging out with you for the last few months, can we do the classic beginning of, who are you? And how did you come to create this thing called Q.E.C?
Wow. Okay. It's interesting. I've just today, I'm coming to the end of a book on what current UK medicine is all about. And I've been absolutely horrified at the degradation of the role of doctors in modern medicine. And I actually left medicine. I had a strong intuition in about 2007, 2008, that medicine was going badly off the rails. And I had this thought in my head, there has to be another way. This isn't working, using pharmaceuticals, going into all these lists of protocols, trapping people, trapping doctors. And I took, the courage. Luckily, I had a husband who was willing to support me, and I just left. I didn't really know what I was going to find and where I was going to go. But I had read a book by Bruce Lipton about the subconscious mind. And I was also a trained gestalt psychotherapist, so I had that skill. It didn't help at all as a GP because you only got 5 minutes. It's no good being a good gestaltist in 5 minutes. But I had that skill. And so I left medicine to try and find another way. And it was a scary 3-4 year journey of attending all kinds of different trainings. I really thought that there must be something out there that I can learn on how you work with the subconscious mind thing. And actually there wasn't. There was dribs and drabs of neurological things here and there, but nothing that really made any sense that I could grasp and say, okay, I can take people's problems now and change them with this big computer. The subconscious mind is the big computer, you see. Our conscious mind doesn't have much power. But there was nothing. And then one day, thank God, I've got a husband who says things at the breakfast table. He said, I'm getting sick of you doing all these courses. Why don't you join them all up and create your own? And I said to him, don't be ridiculous. I can't do that. And he said, of course you can. And I slept on it and I came back the next day and I said, you know what? I think you got a point. And that's all I did. It was one of these kind of organic things. And eventually it all came together to be Q.E.C.
Which stands for?
Quantum energy coaching.
And I've actually never asked you this. Why did you call it that? How did you come up with that particular words?
Well, it was difficult to find a name for it. And so much of what I do, I've kind of is very intuitive. And I knew that it had to be about quantum energy because we've got the body completely wrong. Modern medicine still, unfortunately, in most departments, treats the body like a machine with moving parts. And that's why the person who does the bladder work can't talk to the person who does the skin work. They just don't understand each other, which is insane because actually the body is a quantum computer. It has this incredible energy field, all interconnected. So I thought, the work that I was going to do was from that place of quantum understanding, quantum energy.
Lovely.
And it has a coaching element. I brought my gestalt into it, you see. I think it's very important. If we can't sit and listen to somebody's story and hear what happened to them, then how can we ever begin to look for a solution? So I wanted the skill of the coaching side, so quantum energy and then coaching. And that's how I came up with the name. Seemed to work.
Lovely. I'm glad I asked. And for those that don't know what Gestalt is, what's that?
Gestalt is a form of psychotherapy, which is available in the UK. Anybody can train in it. I trained in it a long time ago in the early 90s. And it's a talk therapy that goes beyond what other counseling therapies do because they, again, very holistic. It takes everything in the person's environment into consideration. So you're not just talking about your problem. A gestalt therapist will be interested in what's happening in your body. And, it has a holistic dimension. So as a doctor, when I was looking for a way to learn counseling, to be able to talk to my patients, that appealed to me because it was, it included the body, it included the medical dimension, and it included the field that the person's in. So you're not just interested in what the person has to say over here. You're actually interested in, where does he live? What does his family look like? What are those influences on him? What culture is he? So all of that in Gestalt is brought in. It's a more holistic, it's a much longer training. Normally counseling training is about 3 years, Gestalt is 6. So it's quite an intensive, long training. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you taught me some of it during the practitioner training, and it's taken my work to a whole new level. Just, I thought I was always very proud of being able to listen beyond the words, and I do teach that through my academy and stuff. But that's different to that. This is more like really tuning into the person and actually being allowed to feel with them, which was something I was never encouraged to do.
Right. And that's what's so lovely about Gestalt. And this is why I've created my Q.E.C with the Gestalt as the container. So, and so when I teach people to teach my students Q.E.C., I have to teach them Gestalt first. So the first 2 weeks, I think it is, of the training is pure Gestalt. And what Gestalt is about is how do you connect? And the problem that we have so much on this planet is disconnection. And people don't know how to make that connection. And it's all through feeling. It's through getting into the heart and feeling a felt sense of connection. And then making just the simple observation as the therapist saying, I see you, or I really hear what you're saying. You know, just that, the gravity of that is so healing and so amazing for most people, because they don't even get that. You know, everything is so fast. They're not seen, they're not heard, they're not understood. But Gestalt slows it all down and says, you know, I teach my practitioners to just do that little bit in those in the early parts of the training. Very important.
I think leading on what you're saying, I think there's some of the more modern transformational techniques and stuff, they almost are a form of gaslighting, and because it's almost like the person isn't allowed to just have that space to feel what they're feeling, be understood and seen. Does that make sense to you, what I'm saying?
Can you give me an example of gaslighting?
Well, it feels like, you know, you've almost to jump to the point of it's just an emotion or it's just a feeling, or, you know, sometimes in my old path, I was taught that compassion was not necessarily feeling with the other person. That would just prolong their suffering. But what you're saying is actually, initially, a person needs to be seen, heard, understood, and that might include, you know, feeling with them initially, at least.
Well, yeah, absolutely. You know, this can go into a whole discussion about can you feel or are you in your head? Okay. And I think the problem with so many of these talk therapies is they come from a mental a headspace, you see, and especially the ones that are very analytical. I'm not going to name names now because there could be many people in the audience who've trained in them. But you know, there's a difference between being in a headspace and being in your body and being in a heart space. And what I loved about Gestalt is it taught me to do that. I mean, I was frozen when I entered Gestalt at the age of 40. I didn't have a clue. I wasn't connected to my feelings. And that's because I had so much trauma. And when we have a lot of trauma, we go into the headspace. It's the only safe place to be. And we disconnect from here. And it took me many, many, many years of sitting with a gentle, loving Gestalt therapist who just said, I hear you, I see you, for me to feel safe enough to eventually come into my body where I could feel and experience the grief and the pain of my story. Mm-hmm. So that's what it's all about. It's about coming out of the headspace and into this heart space, connecting. You can't change until you do that. You can't change without that connection. And that's what worries me so much about what's going on at the moment is the enforced disconnection.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I thought you'd finished there.
Yeah.
I got to forgive myself for interrupting you. Now I've lost train of thought. So that just went great, didn't it? Just there. But I think what I was going to say was last week we were talking about gaslighting when I was talking about forgiveness, because I feel it's so important not to gaslight ourselves. It's almost like if we're denying or unwilling to accept our own reality of what we've experienced, we're not even at a point yet to forgive, because we are almost convincing ourselves there's either nothing to forgive or we're in complete denial. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's what I meant about this whole idea of gaslighting. You taught me that term. Do you mind just saying a little bit more about it briefly as to what it is?
It's a funny term. It actually comes from a play that was on in London many decades ago. I forget the name of the play, but the process of the play was that this man was married to a very wealthy woman, and he wanted to drive her crazy so that he could get her inheritance. He wanted her admitted to a mental hospital. And the way he did it was he kept turning the gas lamp down, and she'd say, oh, it's gone a little bit dark. And he'd say, no, it hasn't. You're imagining it. So he kept turning the gas lamp actually up and down and questioning her evaluation of the atmosphere, and it eventually drove her crazy. So that's where the term gaslighting comes from. It means denying a person's reality or minimizing.
How often does that happen? You know, if either someone's got recently into personal development, self-help, and everything has to be positive. And then someone comes along and says they got a problem, and they'll say, "Oh, just be present, or just think positive, or whatever." It's so common these days, and it's so relevant to forgiveness, because until we're at that point beyond gaslighting, I don't know how we can actually get to forgiving.
Well, it's difficult to become real about anything until you can get into your body and connect with your feelings. You see, that for me is always the first step anyway, which would include forgiveness, which would include having a realistic understanding of who I am and what I feel. Because when we're in that headspace, we're in such a removed a reality that is not who I am. One of the biggest things that people say to me when they first start having therapy with me is, I want to find out who I am. I don't know who I am, because I've been so bombarded throughout their parenting, the childhood experiences of being told, oh, don't be so sensitive, there's nothing wrong with you, and stuff like that they completely disconnect from their own inner guidance, and they don't know who they are anymore by the time they're in the adult world. And people are alienated and deeply depressed and anxious. And this is the foundation for most of the maladies we see today, is deep disconnection from self.
You remind me of something else that we were on the course, which was about toxic shame, and that examples that you're giving can sometimes lead to that. Is that correct? Am I right in the way that, oh, that don't do that, you shouldn't do that, all that kind of stuff? It can lead to some.
Well, the consequence of doing that to very young children under the age of 7, certainly under the age of 3, putting a child down, telling it, don't do that, or you're wrong with that. The consequence of that is the experience of shame, because children enter the world of feeling shame from about the age of 18 months. They don't before that. They're very protected as infants from that experience. But the minute they develop autonomy and they start to crawl and walk and have some independence, if you try and thwart that independence in any way whatsoever, the child's response to that is shame. That's why they go into a tantrum, because it's such a shocking experience. They're so shocked by that the body responds in a full-blown, fall on the floor response. And that's what shame is. And children who get a lot of that at that age end up being very shame-based, sadly.
So just so no one's confused here, it's okay to occasionally give your child guidance. We're not saying don't give your child guidance and never say no, but there's something where it gets to a point where it turns into this thing called toxic shame, which seems to be different than just this very good human experience of shame, because that's how we know what's right and wrong in our boundaries and stuff. So am I right? And we can't damage a child every time we say don't do that.
No. I mean, obviously, every time we say no and a child's going to jump off the balcony is an experience, and they do have an experience of shame when you shout no. But it's the way you manage it. And, when you pick them up and go, oh, there, come over here, let's go and get a nice glass of water kind of thing. And you distract them and you help and you support. Toxic shame is an entirely different thing. This is where you have over-controlling parents who cannot allow any individuality in the child, showing that it's got that individuality and is now moving away potentially. And they squash it down through over-controlling and manipulative behavior. It's the kind of thing that you would get in narcissistic parenting, where a narcissist cannot see a child outside of her own needs. She can only see it in terms of, this child is here to serve me. And that's where toxic shame comes from. Most of the people I've met, including myself, because I had that beginning as well, come from a narcissistic parenting style, which is severe, and it's continuously that way. But your ordinary one now and again is not going to harm a child now.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure people don't leave here with thinking they should never do that. Okay, great. All right, I did promise that we would talk about forgiveness, but I just also wanted to give my guys a chance to get to know you and showcase some of your wisdom and knowledge, because it's amazing what you know. And so I wanted just to go off piece a little bit, but I'm sure it will come back in the end. So we did say we're going to talk about forgiveness. So what is forgiveness, and why would we want to forgive?
Well, forgiveness is an interesting thing. You know, a lot of people come to me for work, and I've started working in the last 5 or 6 years, almost exclusively now with trauma. And I tell people that I've got this way of working with trauma, which the main part of it is forgiveness. And many people go, I don't want to do that. You know, I've done the forgiveness work. I've been on the workshop. I've done it. And what people don't understand, and this is when I start to then explain what I'm talking about here. You see, forgiveness, when you do it consciously, you consciously forgive those that perpetrated whatever they did against you, is one thing, and you may feel better for a while. I tried to go on those workshops too once upon a time, and it didn't really last. Nothing really happened. There wasn't any fundamental change in the way I felt towards the perpetrator. Okay. What I realized as you know, with creating my own work anyway, if you don't work at the subconscious mind, you don't get lasting change of the key things in life, such as trauma. And forgiveness is absolutely necessary in order to heal trauma. And the reason I came across this, thank goodness, was because I am South African, and I went back to South Africa when Nelson Mandela was brought into power. And there was potential in that country for, you know, devastation. There really was. I mean, it was a very, very tricky time, because there have been huge crimes against humanity perpetrated by police and so on. And what Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Desmond Tutu, together decided on was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where it wasn't a court, but it was set up like a court, where they got all the people who had civil rights and violations against them to tell their stories to the police who had perpetrated the crimes. They had them all in the courtroom, and it went on for 3 years, the stories just one after another. And the police would be listening to this, and they would be crying. Everybody was, you know, exposed to the reality of victims and perpetrators being with each other, and they asked for forgiveness. You know, can you please forgive me? And quite often what would happen is they would cross the room and actually embrace each other in that forgiveness moment. And what Desmond Tutu said after those 3 years, he came out of that and he said, this is what has changed the entire nation and brought about peace. Because without forgiveness, you don't get true change. You don't get true acceptance of what was done to you. And it was so successful, the truth being told, and then the reconciliation with forgiveness that followed, that this commission was, it's kind of spread globally. There were more than 2,000 or 3,000 of them, happened all over the place because it was so successful. So I took that and I went, okay, I'm going to use forgiveness in my work with trauma and see whether it works. And as always, I tested myself first, because I'd had horrible traumas, one of which was having to forgive the British medical hospitals for my baby dying and completely mismanaging my child. Wow. And I was very angry, still very angry about it, but I did my own work on myself with forgiveness, and it really lets the whole trauma go in a way that it becomes distant. You see it as a memory, it's there, but there's no more emotional tie to it. So that's the power of forgiveness. It seems to change the wiring in the brain in a way that is immediate and permanent, and, you know, it can be set aside, that particular trauma, when you work on that.
Wow. Okay, thank you for that. That's a beautiful definition and explanation and examples. And I'm sorry what happened to you as well, that you had to forgive that. I meet some people that don't feel they have the right to forgive. I almost have to sometimes be in conversation with them, trying to almost say, I don't have the right to forgive my parents or whatever. And what would you say to someone that doesn't really have the right to forgive, or they have a resistance around forgiveness?
There are quite a few people who have resistance. Some people have, for different reasons. Some might be, I'm still very angry and I could never forgive. And others say, well, I'm not God. It's not my job to forgive. I don't get into any of those things. What I tell them is that in order for you to be free of this burden that is affecting your life to this day, something that happened 30 years ago, still affecting you to this day, you get triggered, which is how it still affects you. And I say, the forgiveness that you're doing is to heal yourself. It's got nothing to do with the other person. What happened was wrong. You and I both agree you should never have been raped, right? It was wrong. I know it was wrong. I agree. And we both go, yeah. But in order for you to be free of that, we need to do the work where we can forgive at the subconscious level of mind. And I have no problem with people accepting once I explain that. I also say it's got nothing to do with God and religion. And, if you are one of those, yes, God will forgive on a different spiritual level, maybe. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about rewiring the brain, and this is a necessary step. There are about 10 steps to my healing protocol, of the first one being forgiveness of the perpetrator, and then forgiveness of self. You've got to, forgiveness is a two-sided coin. You've got to forgive what they did to me and my part in it. I had some part, even if I just lay there and took it. I still had some part, okay? So it's a two-sided coin.
Wow, that's powerful. That's one of the things I love about it, is this double-sided coin that you do. Now, you touched on something I wanted to touch upon. So you talked about the brain and trauma. And something you taught me was that traumas does not only dysregulate the autonomic nervous system, but it also gets stored in the procedural memory part of the brain. Can you, I've mentioned it to my guys a little bit here and there, but you taught me it. So can you share and elaborate a bit more about how trauma impacts the nervous system and or the ANS and the procedural memory? Would that be okay? I'm making you work hard on a Sunday night, but
it's only hard without the PowerPoint and the pictures. But I'll try my best and see whether I can put the language to it. So yes, I mean, trauma. The thing about trauma is there are very few people who understand trauma in the world. The doctors haven't got a clue. They really don't even go there. And, there are some people who are becoming trauma specialists nowadays, but very few people really understand. They think it's all different. There are different kinds of traumas in different areas, but actually they all have exactly the same cause in the human being on the receiving end. So whether you're in the trauma of war, or you're being, raped at 13, or you're being, brought up by a cruel father that beats you all the time, you have this exactly the same action happens in you on the receiving end for all of those. But they try to, so often it's seen as different, and so we have to have different methods of treatment. That's actually not true at all. So what happens when I am on the receiving end of something that's traumatic or unpleasant for me or shocking for me? There are two things. There's only two responses. The first response is the immediate one, which is my nervous system. And the part that responds is the automatic one. So it's called the autonomic nervous system. It's the part that goes on whether I like it or not, will respond to the situation. And it's called fight and flight. And I'm sure everybody knows about, your nervous system moves into fight or flight. What does that mean? It means I'm either going to fight the assailant off or I'm going to run away. Okay, so that's my first option, is action, fight and flight. If I can't, if I'm overwhelmed, if I'm a child and I'm being beaten with a belt, I can't fight, I can't flight, I can't do that. So what happens is the nervous system it keeps increasing in intensity to try and prevent what's happening. And it goes then next into a state of disconnect or freeze, where I don't feel the pain anymore. Okay, so it's a deeper state of disconnect, but it's in order to save me from the unpleasantness. So this is what happens to everybody who goes into shock. They will go into a state of what's called freeze. So they don't feel anything. And that's why soldiers can walk around with an arm off, trying to still help their colleagues get off the field, because they're not feeling anything. They're so frozen. So this is the autonomic nervous system. It responds in that way to protect us emotionally from what's going on. The other thing that happens, besides the nervous system responding, is that memory goes into an area in the brain called procedural memory. And when you've been traumatized, that memory is never forgotten. It gets locked into the part of the brain, which is the same one that we learn speech in, or the same one that we learn to ride a bicycle in. So our procedural memory is alive and working until the age of 7 for everything that we're exposed to. That's why you can teach a child 5 languages under the age of 5, because it just soaks it in and it knows it, never forgets. And the same thing happens with trauma. If I'm raped at 13, that experience will go into that memory and it will never go away. It will be there as the day it happened, so that every time I see a man with that color hair or a room that looks like that, this trauma memory wakes up, just as my language might wake up and I can speak Russian all of a sudden. Mm-hmm. I remember that trauma as if it was yesterday. So those are the two things that happen. We get a memory that never goes away, just like riding a bicycle is never forgotten. And this is the burden. People carry more and more of these memories that never go away in the brain, and they get more and more burdened because there's more to be triggered. So I'm constantly going into fear or going into freeze. And so what I've learned to do, I mean, when I did TRE and Maya knows, she came and learned TRE as well. I took TRE to South Africa thinking this was the answer.
What does TRE stand for, briefly?
Trauma releasing exercises. I brought David Baselli to England, and then I brought him to South Africa, and I became the national trainer for 10 years. So I was the top dog in TRE, and I thought this was how we were going to get rid of our trauma. We'd shake it off, because you don't have to talk about anything. You just lie on the ground, you shake it off. And what it does, it's beautiful what it does, but it takes 3 months. It brings the nervous system out of that height of fight and flight or freeze state down to a nice relaxed ground level. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't do anything with the memory in the brain. You're still left with that. You still get triggered next time you see the man with a white hair. You get triggered, boom, back into that trauma, and your nervous system gets switched on. And I saw then, after 10 years of trying so hard to make it the thing that was going to be for trauma, I realized that it's pitfall. And the other problem was you had to keep doing the exercises. You couldn't stop after 3 months. I was still doing it after 4 or 5 years. And one day, David Baselli, who is the founder, developer, and trainer, I said to him, how long do I have to keep doing this TRE? You know, 3 times a week, you've got to find time to lie on the floor and shake. And he said, for the rest of your life, you have to keep doing it. And I thought, no, I can't do this anymore. I've got to find a better way to work. So anyway, that's what Q.E.C can do now. It can do both. I bring the nervous system back to balance in a much quicker time than 3 months. Generally 4 or 5 sessions is all it takes to bring it back to a ground level of calm. And then we heal, we wipe out those memories in the brain so that they're not triggered anymore. And each trauma will take a separate session.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. You nailed it. So you did well for Sunday night. Thank you very much for that explanation. Autonomic nervous system, procedural memory. First, while I remember, you've said it a couple of times, you've been quietly pitching the name of your book. There has been another way. I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that you had a book come out recently. Is it there?
Yeah, let me get it.
And the book is called There Has to Be Another Way. It came out this month, or January, or was it January? January. There you go. There has been another way. And that's not teaching Q.E.C as such. It's more your story. Is that right?
It's my story and why I left medicine and why I created Q.E.C. And I share at the end some of my own healing, my own Q.E.C healing on myself. Yeah.
Beautiful. So there you go, guys. I see lots of people writing it down, so you might get a few sales tonight. Awesome. There has been another way. There's something that I want to ask you is that you're giving some quite extreme examples of traumas right now, but I've felt that I've healed a lot of trauma with you, and I never had any of these big traumas that you're talking about. So can we bring it back to, not everyone's had these traumas, but they might still have trauma to heal. So what sort of traumas that aren't so extreme are you aware of that you have to work with people with often?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I did just give the extreme examples because that was the first that come to mind. I suppose I come out of a country, South Africa was such a training ground for all of this trauma work because everything just came in extreme packages. Mm-hmm. But I'm now back in gentle Devon and life is not so extreme here anymore. Yeah, no, look, just basically the people that really want to come and do Q.E.C these days, there's still a lot of trauma, I have to say, underneath the surface. But on the surface, most people just have a level of discontent. They might have a bit of anxiety, chronic anxiety, or they might have a bit of depression, or they might have medical problems that have started to crop up. And all of these are all signs that the nervous system is being chronically under stress, low-grade stress for a long, long time. Mm-hmm. And finally, you're getting the breakthrough as medical problems. And, once you start getting sick and start going to the doctor, then the system is breaking down. Okay. The way that medicine explains it is a load of nonsense. What it really is the system breaking down because it's not been relieved of the pressures and the stresses. So I love working with people who haven't got these major traumas because it's incredibly satisfying to see somebody go from a space of, depression, anxiety, not sleeping well, a few symptoms, gut problems, what, not really happy about life, not really sure whether there's a future. My relationships are not so great. And, I'm not getting on with my kids so well. Brilliant. Come to Q.E.C for that because that's really easy to work with. Do you know what I'm saying? And at the end of 4 or 5 sessions with me, 6 sessions maybe, those people they really write me letters and say, I'm a completely different person. I don't know how we've done this, and they find that peace and that connection and that health and vitality. Again, I've got to start writing a book now about case studies. That's my next book because there's so many wonderful stories to share.
I'm getting the door knocked. I'm in a hotel right now, so someone might walk in on us any second. No, ora por favor. All right, we'll see if that's enough. Yes, you mentioned thwarted autonomy, which is a more subtle one that's less severe as a trauma. I also learned from you about proximal abandonment. What's that?
It's more common now than it ever has been. So proximal means being with. To be next to someone means to be proximal to them. You and I are proximal at the moment. So proximal abandonment is when the mother is there, but she's not there. So the infant will be emotionally abandoned, even though the mother is taking care of its needs, feeding it, washing it, putting it to bed. But she's emotionally distant because she's got postnatal depression, or because she's so traumatized herself, she's frozen, or because she's in a state of stress because she's getting divorced, whatever it might be. Mm-hmm. If an infant is exposed consistently to mother being there but not there available to meet his needs in a skin-to-skin, face-to-face contact, that child will experience proximal abandonment. And it's most severe and it's most important under the age of 3, certainly in the infancy. If that attunement experience is called attunement by the pediatricians, if you do not get your needs met in that age group, 0 to 3, it affects you for the rest of your life. There are consequences. So that's proximal abandonment, and this is what I work very hard to heal because many, many people have had that experience.
There's also evidence about things being passed down through generations as well. I'm not talking about past lives. I'm talking about literally things that run in the family tree, like grief or whatever. I've had a couple of clients that I've seen a whole line of grief that they've been trying to heal with Q.E.C. Have you observed that too?
Absolutely. And I'm even getting to the stage now where when I'm working with the person's condition that is a mirroring of previous generations doing the same thing, I'm adding now at the end of the trauma formula that I'm separating myself from previous generations. to cut the tie from that. So we found a sentence to state that energetically we're going to stop this coming down anymore. So there is an energetic flow down the generations, but more than the energetic flow, I think, is just the repetition of the behavior patterns. That's why things get recreated.
Yeah, I was working with a client with Q.E.C, and they'd be experiencing like underlying depression and sadness, but it appeared to be more like a misdiagnosed grief that had been passed down. And I think, I've been really fascinated recently to see how depression can often be it's an underlying loss and grief, and it is diagnosed as sadness, but actually when you get to the heart of it, it seems to be something else.
Yeah.
I don't know if you find that too, but that's just me asking my teacher about that. is that something you've seen too?
I'm seeing very interesting. I'm seeing a family at the moment who are worried about their teenage daughter. So I'm creating new work with families now where I don't see the children, I work with the parents. So I said to the parents, you need to come and let's work with you first. Work with dad, no problem with him. And then I started working with mum. And she said all she'd had in her lifetime and in all the generations before her was the experience of suicide. She witnessed her father trying to commit suicide. When she was 13 herself, she was stuck in a mental hospital behind locked doors because she was suicidal, in a room with a mattress and a metal frame. This is not in our country, this is in the East somewhere. Locked in for 4.5 months because she was suicidal, so never healed, never treated. And now guess what happens? She's with me. That afternoon, we get a call to say the daughter's attempted suicide. So now I'm working with her history, her parental history, and everything was about suicide. And here's her 14-year-old daughter who's trying to commit suicide. You wonder about what is going on there. Anyway, we're making great progress because we've healed the daughter. She's already going back to piano lessons and she's not suicidal anymore. But mum's got a lot of healing to do in her. And until she heals her history, that child's at risk because she's just passing on the suicidal energy, whatever that is. I'm not talking very, very professionally here, but I don't know what you call this stuff.
Oh, wow. It's remarkable. And I got to be honest, like with when you categorize it, there's both kind of extreme types of trauma, stress, impressions in the nervous system, stress and stuff that's carried that dysregulates the nervous system and impacts procedural memory. That's answering Suji, who asked what the definition of trauma. So I'm trying to cover that. But you've also got the less, severe examples that are just almost how many kids were raised in the 60s, 70s, 50s. It was just take the kid home, put them in the room next door, let them cry it out. They'll eventually stop. All these subtle, just cultural ways. I honestly don't know if I meet anyone right now that couldn't do with a few sessions just to release whatever's there. Have you met anyone recently who hasn't got some trauma that they could let go of?
What my honest feeling is? I think 100% of people are traumatized at this time on the planet, and having gone through, the stresses of the last 2 years. If you weren't before, you will be now. So, there's so much work out there. We definitely need more Q.E.C practitioners. But the good news is you can do it online. You don't have to have the person into your home. I mean, that's a luxury to have people come and visit me at home. But I have a global reach. And, I'm healing people in Australia. I've got this incredible family with 3 damaged children. And we're just doing incredible work. In a few weeks, the kids are better. They're moving on with their lives. So, everybody's traumatized, Sandy, seriously.
And for those that have no idea what Q.E.C is, do you want to end by just giving a quick little kind of guide as to what would a session involve?
Well, it's a series of sessions. I usually do anything between 3 to 6 sessions. And the first session is really to get your whole history and whole story. So I hear everything about you from the beginning. Want to know everything from the time you're in the womb, what experiences you might have had. So that I get a picture of your past, and then I want to know, what are you struggling with now? What do you want to change? Why are you here? Is it a physical problem? Is it a medical problem? Is it an emotional or psychological problem? Maybe it's anxiety, whatever it is. In the first session, each session is at least half the session is spent listening. Tell me what's going on. Let me really hear. Let me really grasp. And then once I've heard that, we decide we'll start off working where you are now. I always start where people are. The past can come later. And what would you like to change? Well, I really want to get rid of like your partner, I want to get rid of my panic attacks. I can't go out of the house. I'm really housebound with this. And then I offer the person the opportunity for self-healing, because I'm not prepared to fix anybody anymore. I did that as a doctor, it didn't work. So I hand somebody a magic wand and I say, imagine you've got a magic wand and you've got stuck in the house with panic attacks. You can't get out of the house for 8 years. Take a magic wand, tell me what you'd rather be. And she says, I want to be free of panic attacks and able to go anywhere. That might be her sentence. I would write her sentence down word for word. And then we do the technique. There will be other sentences, but let's say that one. So I empower the person to go to their highest thinking in their brain to come up with a solution for themselves. We install their sentence for themselves, not my sentence. And I use a simple technique which creates a gamma brainwave in the brain. It's you breathe in a certain way. For 5 breaths, you sit in a crossover position like this, which joins the left and right hemispheres, and I ask you to bring up a feeling of gratitude. And those 3 things, when they're done together, boom, you get the brainwave changes to what's called a gamma brainwave. It's a very fast brainwave for installation. So as soon as you have the feeling of gratitude, you say yes to me or you nod your head. I read you your sentence, you repeat it after me, and it goes into your subconscious mind. And that actually changes the wiring in the brain there and then permanently. It's done. We never have to repeat that one again. And you experience the shift in that. Sometimes people will feel it at the end of the session. They'll say, I'm feeling a bit lighter, or I'm feeling a bit dizzy, or whatever. By the next day, as your partner did for me, she sent me a message to say, my anxiety's gone. It's gone. It's gone. I can't believe it. It's gone. So yeah, it's very quick. It's very quick. So that's a typical session for one symptom, just to give you a kind of little story there. But obviously, as people have more details and more things that they're dealing with, it becomes a tiny bit more complex. But it's a very simple, straightforward way to work. I don't require anybody to have previous training in anything at all. I've actually even trained, my best Q.E.C practitioner was an 18-year-old girl in Cape Town who had just finished school. And she came, she had no other input in her head. She came and she soaked up Q.E.C. She was fabulous. She ended up being one of my best practitioners. So you don't have to have previous experience. It's very easy, actually.
And what I love about it is that when you get into later sessions, you're also doing the forgiveness, whatever you need to forgive. And you can also use it for addictions, manifestation, all that sort of cool stuff too. So it's very flexible. But thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to wrap up the official interview. Any final words for those listening in the future?
At a time where we've had nothing but bad news and seemingly things out of our control on the planet, I really want to say that with Q.E.C, you can get your control back, you can get your life back, you can get your health back, and you can get your happiness back. Really, I really mean that. And please go and you're a fantastic therapist. Go and see Sandy for some Q.E.C and see how it works.
That's very kind of you. Thank you. It means a lot coming from you. Hopefully, a different topic, different day. You might come back one day, but until then, I wish you many, many thanks for your time with us today, Dr. Melanie Salmon. And if after listening today you want to experience Q.E.C for yourself, then head over to my website, minddetox.com, to book some one-on-one Q.E.C sessions with me.